Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being here today for our annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day commemoration. My name is Lexis Van. I am a program coordinator for the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. And on behalf of the University of Denver, the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and Black Community Initiatives, I welcome you to our annual celebration. Today, Today we will engage in some acknowledgements, a welcome from our Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Engagement, and hear from our keynote speaker, Dr. Pickens. As we begin all of our events, I would like to start this event with a land acknowledgement. Denver is home to many different citizens of indigenous nations, and we recognize their enduring presence on this land by paying respects to their elders, both past and present. Please take a moment to consider the legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and resettlement that bring us here together today, and please join us in uncovering such truths at all public events. Now is the time to reflect upon and personally reconcile how the genocidal acts against indigenous communities intersect with our learning, collaboration, and sharing of knowledge. I am also here to acknowledge the labor of my ancestors. We must remember and understand that this country and our institutions are built on the many unpaid, unaccredited, and disrespected backs of folks that were subjugated to enslavement. Let us remember their contributions, lives, and humanity. We thank you for the things that we will never know, the cries that we will never hear, and the courage it took to survive. We acknowledge the blood that was shed, the families broken, and the hopes and dreams of the slave. We acknowledge those that made something out of nothing, and we are closer to them than we really think. We honor Black lives taken too soon, Black brilliance locked up behind bars, Black bodies bounded up in systems, Black mental health terrorized by racism, Black trans lives cut short by ignorance, and we denounce anti-Blackness in all its forms and seek to become intimately familiar with the taste of liberation for all. And with the importance of our breath is a reminder that resistance in humanity. Take a breath with me. Okay, so to begin today, next is Dr. Hammond, the Associate Vice Chancellor of the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Academic Engagement.
So hello, everyone. Hi. As Lexis said, I'm Dr. Lauren Hammond, and I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor of DEI, Academic Engagement, and I want to welcome you to our annual MLK commemoration. Dr. Witt, who could not be here today, sends his warm greetings, and I want to convey gratitude on behalf of the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for your presence here today as we honor the life and legacy of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a community. Now, in the spirit of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the African American church tradition, I won't be before you long this morning. I do mean it though. When I first learned that the focus of this event would be a portion of King's I've Been to the Mountaintop speech, I was stirred for 3 reasons. As a number of you know, my PhD is in history, and so first, as a historian, I love it when we wrestle with primary sources. Second, as the speech opens, King gives license to both holy and historical imagination when he begins to ponder his answer if the Almighty asked him which age he would like to live in. Despite the wonders of ancient Egypt, Greece, and Rome, the cultural and aesthetic outpouring of the Renaissance, Martin Luther's actions at Wittenberg, and so on, King said that if he would be allowed to live just a few years into the second half of the 20th century, he would be happy. Knowing that to some his answer might seem strange, King explained his choice by saying, "I know, somehow, that only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. He went on to reference the social and political effervescence of his age, the civil rights struggle, decolonization in Africa, the peace movement in the face of Cold War conflict, and the struggle for human rights. Having won significant victories with the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act, King had turned his own attention to calling for decent housing, a decent wage, and the end to U.S. involvement in Vietnam. All his activism was motivated by love and what, in other speeches, he referred to as, quote, the brotherhood of man. These anchors are what led him to be present in solidarity with sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee on that fateful day, April 4th, 1968. Third, centering this speech allows us to think beyond MLK's I Have a Dream speech given at the March on Washington in August of 1963. Too often, as I have talked about Dr. King, taught about Dr. King, and heard commentary about Dr. King, it has seemed as if he is frozen in 1963, as if we too have cut his life short, as if, though indeed he was taken from us too soon, he never said or wrote another word after that historic march. But King went on to live almost 5 more years. I've Been to the Mountaintop is the last speech that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. ever gave. Just a few short hours later, he would be cut down at the age of 39 before he could reach full flower. Centering this speech gives us a chance to restore King to a fuller sense of who he was, a fuller sense of his humanity, and allows us to engage with King and his vision for what he called the soul of America more deeply. I invite you, indeed today I charge you, to read or listen to his later speeches. Start here at King's Inn with I've Been to the Mountaintop, and then contemplate the drum major instinct, and then turn to where do we go from here, and then pick up beyond Vietnam, and then, you will have had a chance to wrestle with what is perhaps the fullest or the most mature articulation of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream. Thank you. Now, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Amy Pickens. Dr. Pickens received her BA from California State University, Bakersfield, and her MA and doctorate degrees from the University of Northern Colorado. Dr. Amy Pickens, she, her, is a respected servant leader in the realm of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and the visionary founder and CEO of Aligned Purpose and Coaching Consulting, LLC. A wellness practitioner and a 200-hour certified yoga teacher, Dr. Pickens integrates holistic wellness practices with her deep commitment to social justice and equity. Her approach is rooted in the belief that true change begins with centering our inherent humanity and fostering environments where everyone, especially community members, can thrive. This past summer, she served as a postdoctoral fellow for the African American Policy Forum, led by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, and she was recently voted in as a board member for the Transformative Justice Project Colorado and has served on the Proclaiming Colorado's Black History Committee. Please join me again in welcoming Dr. Amy Pickens to the University of Denver.
Thank you so much. Let me switch the slides here. All right, thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I am a yoga teacher, so I'm gonna start there because I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety up here today. A little bit of anxiety, and partially because it's such an honor. It's such an honor to be here in front of you all today. It's such an honor to pay tribute to Dr. King and his legacy. So just like Lexis, I too am going to start with some deep breathing. And I'm gonna ask you all to join me, because really I'm doing it for me, but I'm gonna ask you all to play along. So let's go ahead and exhale everything out. So open mouth, exhale. And then let's take a deep breath in. Hold at the top for 2, 3, 4. Open mouth, let something go. One more time together, please, just for me. Deep breath in. And let something go. Thank you so much. Now I'm ready to begin. It's dark enough to see the stars. It's dark enough to see the stars. These words might seem paradoxical, but in truth, they carry the profound weight of our moment. Darkness, as Dr. King so powerfully reminds us, it can feel overwhelming, burdened by grief, by confusion, uncertainty, despair. Yet even in the darkest of times, Dr. King reminded us that there is light. And that light may flicker faintly. It may be hard to see, but it's always present. It's always there. The light of those who came before us, the light of truth, and the light that lives within each of us. And I would challenge you that it is our responsibility to illuminate that light, to nurture it so it can guide our path forward. Because it's here, in this delicate balance of darkness and light, here is where we find clarity. Here is where we find purpose. Here is where we find the possibility of transformation. And by stepping into the light, we honor those who came before us. By stepping into the light, we give permission for others to do the same. By stepping into the light, we light the path for those who will come after us. As previously mentioned, today we're going to focus on Dr. King's final speech. And most of us are familiar with his closing lines. As you see on the screen, he said, "I've been to the mountaintop. I may not get there with you, but what I want you to know tonight, that we as a people will get to the promised land." These words have inspired, they've uplifted, they've reminded us of the power of hope for generations, and certainly it's a hope that we all need. But today, I want to challenge us. You see, his final speech wasn't just a reflection of hope. It was also a roadmap for liberation. It wasn't merely a call for unity. It was a demand for radical unity, and there is, in fact, a difference. A unity that refuses to ignore truth. A unity that's forged in struggle. A unity that is purposeful. It's strategic. It's revolutionary. Liberation, he reminds us, is the promised land. And so today, I'm going to invite us to lean into that idea of radical unity, to lean into the tension of his words, to explore the lessons that are perhaps hidden. In the moments where his voice wasn't reassuring, but perhaps unsettling, where he challenged us, because it is there in the depths of his vision, that's when we find the clarity that we need. That's where we find the light to move forward. So today, let us begin then with Sankofa, a term of the Akan people of Ghana that teaches us, or loosely translates to, go back and get it. You see, to move forward, we must first return to the wisdom of our ancestors, to those who came before us. You see, this struggle that we find ourselves in today, it isn't new. The oppressor's strategy, it's not new. So before we determine how we move forward, we must carry the lessons of those who came before us. We must carry their struggles. We must learn from their struggles. And we must carry their victories into the present. So in that spirit of Sankofa, today, we go back to Memphis, back to that rainy night when Dr. King spoke not only to a crowd, but to a movement, to a people, and to the generations who would come after him, to you and to me. And in his words that evening, that's where we find the truth. We find, as he tells us, that when the oppressed come together, something happens in Pharaoh's court. Something powerful, something revolutionary. And during his last speech on that rainy evening in Memphis, Dr. King spoke of unity. And unity is this word that has been upheld as the highest ideal. But I'd argue that too often it's misunderstood, it's diluted, and most often probably purposefully misrepresented. A quick Google search of the term unity will bring up pictures such as the ones that you see here on the screen. In our collective memory, unity has been oversimplified into images of people setting aside their differences, holding hands, perhaps singing in harmony. But Dr. King's call for unity was not about comfort. It was about confrontation. It was not a kumbaya moment. It was a radical demand for truth, for justice, for accountability. You see, Dr. King spoke of a unity that was not born from the silence, from the silencing of our differences, but from the struggle to address them. It was a unity that was forged in purpose, a strategic solidarity that refused to homogenize struggles, but instead recognized them and their interconnectedness. This is the kind of unity that Dr. King demanded when he said, when the slaves get together, something happens in Pharaoh's court. So if you take a look up there at the screen, that quote comes directly from Dr. King's final speech. Can I ask somebody else to read it? Any volunteers in the room?
You know, whenever Pharaoh wanted to prolong the period of slavery in Egypt, he had a favorite formula for doing it. What was that? He kept the slaves fighting among themselves. But whenever the slaves get together, something happens in Pharaoh's court, and he cannot hold the slaves in slavery. When the slaves get together, that's the beginning of getting out of slavery.
So powerful. Thank you for reading that aloud for us. I appreciate that. He kept the slaves fighting amongst themselves. So Dr. King, in the spirit of Sankofa, knew that he needed to go back to go forward. And so when he spoke about Pharaoh's court, he highlighted that Pharaoh's power, like that of all oppressors, depends on keeping the enslaved divided, pitted against one another, distracted by artificial divisions. Dr. King understood and recognized that division is one of, if not the, most effective tool of the oppressor. And so he called us to a unity that would disrupt those systems, a unity that would challenge the very foundation of Pharaoh's court. And I want to go back to the previous slide for just a minute. When I look at these pictures, I don't see a unity that's going to disrupt Pharaoh's court. I see a unity that's likely going to uphold Pharaoh's court, right? And so we're talking about a different kind of unity, a radical unity. Take a moment to look at some of these recent headlines on the screen. Give you a moment to just read through some of them. Going back to go forward. These headlines highlight a familiar strategy that Dr. King spoke of. Division that distracts us from the real issues. Division, misinformation that draws attention away from the acts of Pharaoh's court. Headlines that want to take our attention away from the consolidation of power and wealth by a select few, some of whose names you might just happen to see on the screen right now. This strategy manifests in policies that pit communities against each other in the fight for resources, and rhetoric that manipulates working class people into blaming DEI, into blaming immigrants, instead of addressing corporate greed, instead of addressing the exploitation of global crises that displace millions while a handful continue to amass unimaginable wealth. The formula hasn't changed, but neither has the transformative power of radical unity, of what happens when we stand together, united in purpose, for a purpose, and with a vision. Radical unity is not easy, and I won't stand up here and pretend that it is. It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths. It requires us to engage and lean into uncomfortable dialogue. It demands that we acknowledge the ways that we've been manipulated into division. And sure, maybe it calls us to link arms, but not by ignoring our differences, embracing them as the very source of our strength. So when we think of unity in the context of Dr. King, let's hold on to this powerful image of unity as we move forward, because when the oppressed stand together, when we link arms and unite with purpose, systems shake, and liberation becomes not just possible, it becomes inevitable. Something is happening in our world. Dr. King said it then, and it remains true now. Across the globe, people are rising up. That night in Memphis, Tennessee, Dr. King called attention to South Africa, to Kenya, to Ghana, here in the US, New York City, Atlanta, Jackson, and where he stood that night in Memphis, Tennessee. And he said, the cry is always the same. We want to be free. Something is happening in our world today. We see it in the Congo, where communities resist exploitation and environmental destruction. In Palestine, where the scars of occupation and an unfathomable loss remain. In Sudan, where resilience persists amidst conflict and displacement. At the US border, where families seek nothing more than dignity and a chance to live without fear. And in that same vein, in the town that I grew up in, just outside of Bakersfield, California, where ICE continues to disrupt and detain lives. The cry is the same. The cry was the same across the globe then. The cry is the same now. We want to be free. But freedom is not simply a destination, and that's the part we too often miss. Freedom is something is not something that we arrive at. It is a practice, it is a process, and it is collective. Dr. King didn't say some of the slaves. He didn't say the leaders of the slaves. Dr. King said when the slaves get together, something happens in Pharaoh's court, which requires that radical unity. And that's something that happens, yes, we aim to disrupt, but that something is not just disruption, it's transformation. Systems of oppression tremble in the face of unity because they're built to survive on our division. Listen, we have difficult days ahead. There's no sugarcoating it. We know it. Dr. King knew this too. But what he also knew, and what we must remember, is that when we unite in purpose, when we unite in truth, we are unstoppable. We may not get to the promised land ourselves, just as Dr. King said, but just like Dr. King, we must do our part to get the next generation closer. The promised land, liberation, it is within reach, but it's hard to see that in the dark. But if we reach for it together, our light also comes together, and we illuminate the path, and we start to see, yes, liberation is in fact within reach. But that's going to require us to unite in radical unity, to dismantle the systems that seek to divide us, to refuse the comfort of complacency, and to link arms in radical solidarity. It is dark enough to see the stars. It is dark enough to see the stars. And as Dr. King said, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. So can we look for the stars? Can we be the stars? And can we follow their light together towards the promised land? Thank you.